You've probably heard the Noah story a million times, but let's just focus on the beginning for just a second, because there are certain things just in the beginning I never caught until recently, and I've heard this story for most of my life. For example, who are the sons of God in Genesis 6? What's the deal with God's 120-year limit? And then who are the Nephilim, and where did they come from? And the real question above all of this is, why is God's solution to human evil to bring a flood upon the earth? In this video, we're going to walk through 11 amazing truths in Genesis chapter 6 that often get overlooked in the Noah story. And then we're going to wrap this all up by connecting this to Jesus. So let's jump into God's Word and unpack this story a bit differently than you might be used to. Hey, welcome to Different Bible Study. I'm Jason Camacho. If you don't know me, welcome to the channel. If this content blesses you, subscribe and make sure you like this video. And then if you're wanting to learn how to study the Bible, dive deeper into the Word of God and just gain a deeper understanding, this is the channel for you. We're in Genesis chapter 6, looking at the Noah story as it unfolds after the genealogy of Adam in chapter 5. And so it says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Right? Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. So notice that contrast between flesh and spirit. It's a problem, at least for now, with the way that things are going on. His days shall be 120 years, okay? And usually this is where people will say God is reducing the lifespan of humanity to 120 years. He's putting a cap on how long people can live. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. If you have a footnote in your Bible, it'll say, or giants. The Hebrew here is fallen ones, the fallen. Nephal is to fall. We're on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. And so it seems as though the Nephilim are the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of man. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown, or in Hebrew, the men of the name, of reputation. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. This almost seems like a continuation of Genesis 4, when you read Cain's, lineage and his family and what they do and the city that comes from Cain. And then it pauses in chapter 5 to give you the genealogy of Adam. It's almost as though chapter 6 is picking up from where chapter 4 ended. And so God is grieved to his heart, and he says, once again, God is speaking a lot and evaluating a lot in this chapter. He said, I will blot out man whom I've created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. You wonder why God has to specifically note all the different categories of the creatures. For I am sorry that I've made them. So this God being sorry is part of him being grieved to his heart, and here regretting. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So in this video, as with any of our teachings, if you're not used to this kind of content and this style of study, that's all right. We're going to answer 4 basic questions that are essential for any scripture. Number 1, what does this passage say? Number 2, what does this passage mean? Number 3, how does this apply to my life? What's the wisdom underneath this? And then how does this all point to Jesus? So stick around to the end. That's where at the end we'll tie this all up and connect it to Christ. So like this video, subscribe for more content like this, watch the rest of our Genesis series, click the link in the description of the video for our complimentary Bible reading plan. And then on Thursday nights, we have a follow-up conversation, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That would actually be tonight. So join us 8 p.m. for our follow-up conversation on our Discord server. And let's get back to the text and start making some key observations. Number 1 is we see the corrupted earth. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters are born to them. So man is multiplying. And whenever we see the earth in this text, it's going to relate to this first verse. Okay, whether it's the earth or the land, it's always going to come back. And the context here, verse 1 is setting the tone, letting you know that on the face of the land, things are happening. And man is multiplying, which means the focus is on the occupied land at least. So when God spoke of the earth or speaks of the earth, this doesn't always necessarily speak to the entire planet at large. That's one of the misconceptions people have about this Hebrew word. For land, it's Adamah. When you see the word earth, which there can be a distinction between the two, but the earth is Eretz, which if you pull up this Hebrew word, it can be ground, earth, specific territory, country. And so we want to make sure we have the right scope in view, meaning we want to make sure we're understanding where this is happening, what specifically is taking place, and the earth just refers to the land. This is why a localized flood, some have proposed, is also a very reasonable explanation of what is happening. So if that's a brand new idea to you, totally turned you off, you already clicked off the video, that's fine. But a global flood or a localized flood are both, in my opinion, based on the studies I've done, are equally reasonable based on the text and even archaeology and whatever evidence people bring forth. Second observation is that evil is taking over. So this plays into the corrupted earth. Why is the earth or the land corrupt? The Hebrew, well, we'll get to this in a minute. Man is multiplying, and this is what God originally commissioned mankind to do, right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. But here, man is really beginning to increase. In fact, it says they began to multiply or increase. Versus what we saw at the end of chapter 4, right? Chapter 5 is a genealogy, kind of pauses on the story. And then at the end of chapter 4, if you remember, Adam and Eve have a baby named Seth, replaces Abel. Seth has a baby. And then Enosh, his son Enosh, during his time, people begin to call upon the Lord. And so the Hebrew verb here, kalal or halal, which has a pretty large semantic range when it says they began to multiply. I'm just going to pull in a little bit of Hebrew so you understand what the connotation is behind this. It has a pretty large semantic range. If you will open this up on Logos, it appears 133 times in the Old Testament, and 80 plus of those occurrences carries a negative connotation, and it actually refers to defiling or profaning or violating or to make something impure or corrupt. The other times that this word is used, it can mean a version of starting or initiating or something being pioneered. So that doesn't mean in this context. I want to make sure we understand what I'm saying. When I highlight this, I'm going to highlight all this so it's just not distracting. When I highlight this verse and say mankind's multiplying, there's a corruption of the earth and the land happening. That doesn't mean that, well, this word in certain contexts for began, halal, sometimes it can mean to defile. Therefore, mankind's defiling the earth here, right? That doesn't automatically mean that. But it's very reasonable and even likely, considering the surrounding context and where the story is going, that mankind multiplying here seems to be a corrupting of some kind, a perverted version of God's original desire and mandate to mankind to multiply and fill the earth. Mankind's doing that in a corrupted way. This word here is very important because it's going to be the same word used in chapter 9 as the Noah story comes to an end. It'll say that Noah began to be a man of the soil or the land. And in that context, that's when he gets drunk and weird things happen. So it might be a very reasonable and likely parallel to make to chapter 9 and to say that the context of chapter 6 isn't necessarily positive. Mankind is doing what God wanted, but not in the way he wanted them to be doing it. There also might be another reasonable parallel to the Tower of Babel in chapter 11, where man is attempting to increase as an act of rebellion against God, as a big middle finger to God, with their tower, ziggurat, and their city. But there's a positive way that mankind can increase in accordance with the will of God. We'll see God do that with Abraham. Or Abram. The first application for us is, hey, be considerate of what you're trying to increase, or what you're wanting to increase. Maybe it's wealth, maybe it's self, maybe it's reputation, maybe it's stuff, maybe it's renown and name and business appeal or whatever. We should be constantly thinking through, not in an obsessive way, but just thinking through daily. Am I exalting or trying to increase myself, or am I trying to increase the glory of God in the earth? In other words, are you decreasing so he can increase, or are you increasing your image at the expense of God's glory being seen? So what are you reflecting? What are you magnifying? What are you imaging lately? We are all reflecting something because we're made to image God and be his images in the earth. And If you're not imaging God, you're going to image or reflect something. So all of that in verse 1, I know it's a lot. Verse 2, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were attractive. This is where we get into the conversation of, is this the sons of Seth versus the sons of Cain? Either way, they are taking any of the wives that they choose. But I want to make this clear categorical distinction first. You have the sons of God, okay? You have the daughters of man. They're very attractive, okay? Here's the third observation is the sons of God. Some are going to suggest, this is not the view that I hold, but I'm going to share it because it's a reasonable view. Some will say that Cain and his line are the daughters of man. It's referring to the daughters of Cain's line, or vice versa. It's Cain's sons. Either way, you have Cain's line seeing the daughters of Seth, or vice versa, and taking wives, and they're polluting, the righteous line of Seth, because we see there's two family trees throughout Genesis 4 and 5 so far. You have Cain's lineage, and you have Seth's lineage, right? And some have assumed that Seth's line is pure, Seth's line is holy, Seth's line is chosen, Seth's line is the undefiled kind of race. And the daughters aren't born to specific men from a specific line, though. It just says daughters of mankind. It's a categorical distinction. There are these women who fall under the category of mankind, and then there are these offspring, sons of God. And so there's no specific family line that's noted. Just an entire race of humans having daughters. And here's where I would share a bit of kind of my argument that the sons of God are actually these spiritual authorities that God positioned in the cosmos to have authority over said things in the world. Maybe that's a new concept for you. Jude talks about this, Peter, on some level. The idea is that these are spiritual beings that have spiritual authority, over the world. The sons of God seem to be distinguished from man. Mankind is multiplying, having daughters, and the sons of God, if they're just people, it doesn't really make sense, in my opinion, to say that they see daughters being born to man. The text should specify, and this is just me maybe placing my own, conditions upon the text. If it were going to clearly outline Seth's line versus Cain's line, why not just say so? The sons of God should just be referred to as the sons of woman or the sons of man, just as women are the daughters of mankind. So we just saw the sons of man are fathered by men in Genesis 5. The text has no problem stating when that's applicable, when someone descends from human beings and is the offspring of humans. I don't believe it is likely that the sons of God are humans, or what I'm saying. You have two views, if I haven't been clear enough. The sons of God in one view, that's the line of Seth, right? In another view, the sons of God are spiritual beings, right? Spiritual authorities. Some would say the watchers of Daniel's prophecy, and some would link it to Enoch's Second Temple literature. So I personally don't believe that the sons of God likely are referring to humans. You'll have Adam, like in Luke's genealogy, called the Son of God to note his, I think, unique status among the human race in the genealogy as it relates to Jesus and the narrative point that Luke is making. But not all humans are directly offspring or sons of God, at least in the Genesis narrative. Later on, when it gets into being children of God through Christ and faith, it's a bit different. But for here, at least in the Genesis story, we don't have the luxury of backloading all that New Testament theology into this, because none of that is present in the original audience and in the original writing, the scroll of Genesis, and the point that's being made. We are made in God's image, and Adam seems to be the first to come from God in this unique way, where he's labeled as the Son of God, because he's the first, depending on how you read Genesis, 1 through 3. But sons of God here seems to be more likely referring to a unique category of beings. The sons of God here are the sons of God in Psalm 82 or in Job. There's a spiritual dimension to them, while the daughters of man have a physical, earthly, material nature of the flesh. So we're likely seeing a defilement and a perversion here by this unholy mixture where boundaries are being crossed and things are intermixing that should not be, according to how God has wired things. So if we think about it, God's flood is a response partially to what is happening with the sons of God taking the daughters of man. Because in verse 3, he says, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, he's flesh. This is God responding to, at least, not only, but at least, the daughters of man and the sons of God, like coming together and producing the offspring we see in verse 4. And so if this was just the line of Seth is mixing with the line of Cain, which maybe you hold to that view, my question to you would be, and this is not to be an exhaustive teaching on like who are the sons of God. I could do that another time. I'm just trying to get through the text, make a few points. My question to you would be, why would God see this as so evil that he needs to bring a flood to destroy everything? And you go, well, because Seth's line is pure and undefiled. And I would say, where does it say that in the text? There's nothing recorded yet of God being against intermarriage between Seth and Cain's line. That's an assumption we make because we're backloading Israel's marriage laws into this story as if those are present. And this is the same situation, but we can't afford to make that assumption. This is not the same situation. Israel set apart as the nation of God with these unique, laws that set them apart from the rest of the Gentiles. And there's no such biblical precedence in this story to assume that God is against Seth and Cain's line mixing in any way. There's none of that racial selection and setting apart one. It's just that we see Seth's line seeming to produce more people that are like for God, Enosh, and people worshiping God. And Cain's line is like a lot of the people that come from him, at least the ones worth noting in Genesis 4, are doing evil. So all that to say, we'll make a few more points along the way. Here's the fourth observation. Genesis 3 is repeating. The sons of God are seeing how attractive the daughters of men are. Look at the sons of God, they saw the daughters of man were attractive, beautiful, appealing to the eyes, right? Pleasant to the eyes. This sounds very reminiscent of how Eve sees the forbidden fruit in Genesis chapter 3. And now the sons of God are looking at what is technically forbidden, even if you hold to the view that Seth's line and Cain's line are mixing. If you want to assume that is forbidden in the eyes of God at this point in the story in human history, that's fine. They're taking what is still off limits, and they end up deciding we know what is good. So the daughters of man are the forbidden fruit here on whatever level that is. However you read this. And that wouldn't make sense if this was, in my opinion, just men from Cain's line taking wives from Seth's line or vice versa. We don't see that concept until we get to Israel as a nation. They're not able to intermix with the women from the surrounding nations, not because of race, but because of idolatry, because of false gods, because of paganism. It has nothing to do with race or ethnicity. It has everything to do with the clear difference in allegiance and loyalty and what God they worship. And so this passage opens up in a very similar way, narratively, to Genesis 3. In Genesis 3, the serpent is preying upon the woman with a bad eye towards her to take advantage of her and lie and accomplish his own personal gain, and he has his own self end in mind, like for his own good. And so we have a spiritual being. I think sons of God are spiritual beings preying upon the humans. And so we see a similar sequence of events again in Genesis 3, a creature drawn to something forbidden, taking that thing, God responds, and we see Cain do that in Genesis 4. So we see a certain pattern happening in these stories. And God ends up seeing that the things are good in Genesis 1. When he creates things, he says it is good. And then Eve decides something is good in Genesis 3, which is the forbidden fruit. And now we have the daughters of man in the slot of the forbidden fruit. And the sons of God are like, you know what, that looks good. I'm going to procreate. Even if it's like intermixing of lines, they seem to take and choose according to their preference, however they see fit, Just like God took and chose Adam in Genesis 2. He placed him in the garden, set him apart from mankind. Here we see the sons of God mimicking God by seeing and taking, but it's a perverted version of that. They're taking and choosing according to a wrong definition of good. So they see, they decide, they choose, and they take. Once again, it's just a repeat of the fall in Genesis 3. But this seems to be more cosmic and spiritual in nature. There's a rebellion in the skies that involves the creatures of the earth, humans. Whereas in Genesis 3, there was a it was people committing the earthly rebellion. And so now we get to verse 3, and God responds to the seeing and the taking and the mixing and the multiplication and the increase. And God goes, my spirit shall not abide in man forever. He's flesh. His days will be 120 years. Hey, did you know that this entire ministry runs off the support of people like you? All of our free resources, teachings, and classes are made possible by viewers like you. So if you believe in what God is doing through this ministry and you want to help us in our mission, please consider partnering with us financially. You can give a one-time gift or become a monthly partner on our website. Our mission is to teach people how to read the Bible so they can live and teach it for themselves. And when you become a monthly supporter, you get access to exclusive content, special resources, and other perks coming soon. Visit abovereproachministry.com/donate to give however the Lord leads you. We have many other projects that we're working on that need to be funded. A mobile app for all of our courses and teachings, and other Bible courses that are in the works right now. So thank you so much for all your support and prayers. Let's get back to the video. Here's the fifth observation, is the Spirit of God. He does specify my spirit, my ruach in Hebrew, my life, it can also mean wind, will not abide in flesh. There seems to be this clear categorical separation and even tension between flesh and spirit. They're just not compatible to the point where humans can live forever. It's not possible. God is going to remove his life force, his ruach, from humanity. God's breath of life is what sustains mankind. And God seems to be speaking of how man won't have his breath forever. Rather, God has a clock that's counting down till the years of the flood. And so we might be asking, why is there an emphasis on the flesh versus the spirit? Why that distinction? Why is that being made here? And could it possibly be, reinforcing the unholy mixture here of flesh, daughters of man, and spirit, the sons of God, who are spiritual beings? Like, could these be playing off one another? Either way, this is God taking his life breath back because of what mankind has done with his life breath. And the distinction between flesh and spirit, I think, is worth noting. Once again, God is responding to what creatures are doing and taking in rebellion to him. And so God's spirit, if you remember, some of your translations, mine says abide. Some will say, my spirit will not remain or continue or stay with or in man forever. And in Genesis chapter 1, we saw the Spirit of God hovering over the waters at creation. And we saw in Genesis 2, God breathes his life breath into mankind. And now we see another reference to the Spirit involving both those ideas. We see life and we see abiding or staying in a place. The Spirit of God will not, abide in man forever. God is going to take that life breath in about 120 years when he brings all of this to an end. And here's the sixth observation, is the 120 years. Because some have suggested that this is God shortening the lifespan of humanity for the rest of, time. I will say this, man's life on earth is going to be 120 years because man is flesh. That's what he says. Because he is flesh, he's going to live 120 years. Now, some would say again that God is shortening the lifespan here. From now on, no one will live past 120. But we see at least 15 people in the Bible after Genesis 6 that live past 120. And I don't think we can say, well, those are unique exceptions for God's chosen anointed partners. Abraham is one of them. He's one of God's chosen partners that has a uniquely long life. But most of these individuals who live past 120, they're not even these unique Abrahamic type figures. So you can just do a quick search and see that, no, there's quite a few people that live past 120. So either God is making a hard and fast rule, and then the exceptions are emphasizing a theological point later on, or God is making a hard and fast rule and somehow it didn't work out, or God is not doing that, and he's saying this is the countdown to the flood. So I don't think he's limiting human life to 120 years, but he's saying in 120 years, my spirit, my life will not continue in these creatures that have my ruach. So, which again is the life or the breath, the Spirit of God. Specifically, it's referring to that generation and how they're going to come to an end, right? And that's how the story actually comes to a close. Is it'll say everything died, everything that had the breath of life, the ruach of God, that animating life force ceased. They died. So we get to verse 4 and the fascinating category of creatures known as the Nephilim. Here's our seventh observation is the Nephilim warriors. So it says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. Here's when they were on the earth. This seems to be a consequence of, or this is why they're on the earth. The sons of God came into the daughters of man. It's a repeat of verse 1 or verse 2. And they bore children to them. The Nephilim seem to be the seed or the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of man. Now let's just look at what the text says about these Nephilim. These were the mighty men of old. They were men of renown. Okay, so let's break this down. A few things to note. Why are these mighty men important for the story? Almost as if the story's setting up like, here's why God has to bring a flood, and the Nephilim are part of this. Mankind's increasing, mankind's corrupting, God is going to bring an end to life, the Nephilim are there. It's like, why do we just have that hanging there? Why do we care about their origin story? Why does it matter if they're on the earth during those days? How does that relate to the wickedness of man? And also, why are they still there after the flood? Like if God's flood was the answer and the solution, the permanent removal of these Nephilim, clearly it didn't work, if that is indeed why God brought the flood in the first place. Technically in Hebrew, the sons of God are coming to the daughters of man. Right here. The sons of God, right here, you have the word in, right? Which when you hear they came into the daughters of man, if you're used to that kind of biblical talk, okay, they're having babies, obviously, because children are born to them. But this word isn't necessarily present in the Hebrew. Some translators, they assume the word in, and that could be a totally reasonable conclusion because of the fact that they're bearing children at the end of this, so that seems to be what's happening. But considering the context, it can easily read, the sons of God came to the daughters of man. Speaking of a clear difference in location, not just categorical difference, sons of God, daughters of man, right, identified with, different natures, but also different locations. They're leaving one location to come to the location of women in order to have children with them. And I think once again we see the hinting at a violation of boundaries happening here that God set between the heavens and the earth. You have spiritual beings transgressing those boundaries, and the word Nephilim literally means the fallen or the fallen ones. Again, this category of beings is derived from the Hebrew verb to fall, nafal, to collapse, to be inferior, to fall behind. And so these fallen ones on the earth seem to be the result of the sons of God mixing with the daughters of mankind. They're mighty ones, is what it says. They were the mighty men. And you're like, well, they said men. We could break that down a little bit. But in Hebrew, it's literally men of the name when it says they were men of renown. Right here is Shem, which is going to be Noah's firstborn son's name. Shem also means name in Hebrew. And if you go to, if it shows me it, why is it highlighting that? I just want men of renown. There we go. If you do a Bible word study real quick, it'll show you name, reputation, renown, fame, all that stuff. When we hear name, we think the label we use to identify someone. In Hebrew thought, and I think we understand this in English as well, the name of someone refers to their legacy, their reputation, their renown. So they are men of the name or the status or a certain renown and reputation as, mighty men on the earth. Just as we'll see Nimrod in Genesis 10 is referred to in this way. And so these mighty men or fallen ones are some kind of warrior champion, like Nimrod, some kind of violent fighter or hunter from the ancient days of old. And then verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. There's a lot of greatness, right? Man is increasing greatly. These mighty men, they are great. They are, they have a great name, a great reputation. And now the wickedness of man is great. So we got to track with what is it that's being magnified in the earth at this point? Wickedness. These mighty men or giants and mankind. So you have man, you have giants, and you have sin, kind of all collaborating to make, you might say, the image of the serpent great in the earth. And so the wickedness of man here seems to involve the Nephilim as being the unholy mixture of sons of God and daughters of man. And it says that the Lord saw, right? You have the sons of God seeing and taking. God's viewpoint is contrasted with theirs. So here's the eighth observation we're about to see is the sick hearts. God saw what? That the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Now you might think, that sounds like an exaggeration. The statement about having only evil desires continually could be hyperbolic and exaggerated. But also let's consider, is this a real condition humanity has fallen into over time? And if that's the case, if this is speaking to the condition of people literally, then was everyone born into this by default? Is every person born with only evil inclinations all the time, or is this a unique case? Because the natural inclination of the human heart, only evil all the time, that's pretty intense. And the wickedness of man is due to the bad hearts, which is only evil continually. And so if there's only evil in the heart, there will only be evil in the life. I think this is a unique case. This is not speaking of what is normative across humanity. Every human born into the world only wants evil all the time. Some theological frameworks hold to that view. But evil behavior is the result of a sick heart. I think this temporary material cleansing in the natural, God is about to bring a flood, right? He's cleansing the earth of evil. Well, that natural cleansing of the world is pointing towards the need for a spiritual, heart-level cleansing. God is not going to fix the heart with the flood. And I think later on that's why we are washed with the water of the Word and the Spirit. And so the thoughts of the heart have a natural disposition towards evil here. I think this is a unique case for Noah's generation. Not to say humanity has never reached this point again, not to say no one has ever gotten to this point again and we're not going to see this again, but to say that this doesn't seem to be the normative. This is not a statement about all hearts across time after the fall. Otherwise, we'd see the flood happening over and over, and God probably wouldn't have promised to never do it. But this doesn't just speak of the imagination. Right here it says, every intention of the thought of his heart. Some translations say imagination of the heart. This Hebrew word speaks of the scheming and the planning and the inventing that happens kind of in the mind before the action. Like all of that is corrupted. It's all defiled. In their heart, it's messed up, and so they're constantly forming and making more evil. And God is deeply, deeply disappointed with the wickedness of man. It's increased in the earth. Sin has taken over. And this seems to contextualize for us the increase in verse 1. Remember I said in verse 1, I think them multiplying is not necessarily a good thing. We're not supposed to high-five them and be like, keep increasing, boys. Sin's increasing. Like this defilement, this rebellion, what God says is only evil continually, that's increasing. It's violence and sin and darkness is taking over, and it seems like a unique situation because of how drastic God's action is. Wickedness has become so great. Instead of people imaging God and making God great through man, evil is overtaking man. Remember in Genesis 4, God tells Cain, hey, buddy, just want you to know, sin is crouching at the door and it wants to consume you. It wants to control you and conquer you and consume you. You have to control that thing. Well, here we see the result of untamed human desire, where sin takes over and violence is rampant and God's image is diminished and the serpent's image, darkness, is magnified. Either way, man becomes great and magnifies something because we're made to reflect. And here's the application for us. Hey, evaluate your heart regularly. Not just your behavior. We can be very behavioral centric, where it's all about what I'm doing. And to a degree, it's healthy to think through these things. But your heart matters more to God because that's the operation center of your behavior. And so what you cultivate inwardly eventually shapes the world around you through your life. So guard your heart. Cultivate intimacy with God. Now that you've been given a new heart in Christ, He wants to transform your mind and your heart even more. So cultivate that. Create an environment where that is promoted and encouraged. And then we see verse 6, the ninth observation is God's regret. And the Lord regretted. He had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. The question we're left with is, how could God regret or repent of something while having all possible knowledge of all things? Like, didn't he know this was coming? So how could he really be sad? God's grieving heart, at least, is contrasted with man's wicked heart. God's concern for life and his desire to see humanity flourish, that is contrasted with man's desire to take life. And God actually grieves himself to the heart. When it grieved him to his heart, this verb, not getting too deep into the Hebrew, but it's a reflexive verb, meaning God is doing something to himself, almost as though he's caused his own deep grief by making man. And God's heart is grieved that man's heart is evil and hard and only wicked continually. This is all about God's heart response to man's heart. God's disposition is towards the good of man. He wants what's good. He wants what makes humanity flourish. He wants what glorifies him and promotes, his kingdom and glory. But man's disposition is towards evil. Man's inclination is towards evil, away from God. And so the word for God being grieved here and regretting, it can also mean to comfort or to console. So when you feel grief, right, there's a sense in which you're trying to console and comfort yourself, and look for anything to bring comfort in the midst of that grief. And so grief is something that is passively happening to us, and we can grieve actively as well. But the word is very closely related to Noah's name in Hebrew. So this word for grieve, regret, this word for regret is nacham, which means to be sorry, to console, to regret, right? And it's a pretty wide semantic range. If you open up Logos, you can see it's to relent. It can mean to comfort, to console, to have compassion, to pity, to relieve, right? All these different ways, like it gets at the same core idea. But Noah's name is Noach. So you have Nacham and you have Noach. Noah's name means to rest, and the verb that his name is derived from means to rest. So the Hebrew word Nacham means to bring comfort or to console, and it's very closely related to Noah's name. They have the same root letters, except the mem. Almost as if this idea is playing on Noah's role in the story, as someone who, remember, Lamech, his father, said, "This one will bring relief or comfort us in our labors." And that's what God is doing to himself. He's regretting, and at the same time, like, there's a self-consoling, and Noah seems to be part of the equation. God knows he has someone to work with, almost as though God, God has caused his own grief through his own creation on some level. Not to say he's responsible for mankind's sin, but he's also provided a kind of solution on the other side of this. There is a comfort coming with Noah, but we're going to see Noah is not good enough to be the comforter for humanity, to deal with the human heart, and that's going to be Jesus. We need Jesus to be the greater Noah. And so here's the application for us: is rest in the truth that God is grieved by evil. And you're like, rest in that truth. Yeah, God is not indifferent to evil. He responds with mercy and justice. And so often we can allow the world and the culture to desensitize us to sin, and we label it grace, and then we diminish the impact of sin on the world around us in the name of mercy, in the name of charity and understanding and showing grace. I would just say be careful that you don't allow your heart to soften the seriousness of human evil, because we have a tendency to do that and downplay the severity of sin. Verse 7, so the Lord said, "I will blot out man whom I've created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds." And you're like, why are the animals being brought into this? He's saying, I'm sorry I've made them. Notice, God's regret is not just about man. Them means everything listed prior. And almost every verse up to this point has included either mankind or the land or both. And God is specifically regretting making man on the land. I want us to pay attention to that. It's that man has been made on the land. And this didn't mean that God made a mistake or would have done it differently. It means God is grieved / regretting what now has to happen because of human free will and where that's taken creation. And so left on its own, like humanity's evil will only intensify and escalate to the point of self-destruction. Like they're on a one-way track to just self-annihilation till there's nothing left and no one to stand. God is essentially, by bringing the flood, accelerating that instead of painfully letting the process unfold over time and letting all the destruction and havoc that probably would be exponentially worse come from letting that transpire. God is interrupting that and just saying, since this is already on a one-way track to that natural end of destruction, let's just accelerate that and let's start over, okay? Maybe you didn't know this, but we create all of these free resources to supplement your faith and to strengthen Christian communities around the world. If you're looking for biblical content to use for discussion in your groups, churches, or one-on-one discipleship, consider using my book Fruitful or any of our different Bible series playlists, or track with us through our current study. Maybe even consider starting an ARM discussion group, which we actually have a weekly men's Bible study here in Spartanburg, South Carolina, if you live nearby to join. And we also have a deeper Bible study discussion every week on our Discord server. Check the Discord event schedule for the time and day. You can find all this info on abovereproachministry.com, as well as on our weekly email. So join the email list to stay updated every single week, and let's get back to the video. Here's the 10th observation. Cleansing with water. When God promises to blot out the world, he specifically says, I'm going to blot out man. That's the focus, okay? And the word for blot, I found this fascinating. The word for blot, which is macha, a mem, a chet, and a hey. This word carries a cleansing dimension. It's the same Hebrew word used of God blotting out sin or washing off his people or wiping clean. And God is bringing a cleansing by removing what defiles the land. So it's not just dirt, it's what's causing the dirtiness and the filth. He's removing that. He's wiping the canvas clean and starting over like a new Genesis story with Noah as a new type of Adam. And so the problem is man. There's no way to get around that. The problem is man and what is happening with man and through man and produced, in man. The focus is man. And yet, and that's not gender exclusive, it's mankind. Animals get wiped out too. So either this is really highlighting mankind's influence on the animal kingdom, and they get roped into this, just like at the end of Genesis 3 with the curse and the land, or this is speaking to how animals have somehow corrupted as well. And so God specifically refers to man as the creature he created. Right there, I will blot out man, whom I've created. And it's like, wait, that seems unnecessary. We already know that. That's like saying, I'm going to blot out people who have 2 arms and 2 legs. So why emphasize that? And I think we see the inverse of the Genesis 2 story happening. God is not breathing life into man. Instead, he's removing life breath from man and blotting them out. He's going, I created them. I have to deal with them. It's supposed to be tragic. Everything is going to be destroyed until the story points out this man named Noah in verse 8. The similar thing happens with Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah when God looks for the righteous people in the midst of a wicked city and generation, and he only finds Lot. And the 2 daughters get roped into it. But notice the emphasis on the land, from the face of the land. Well, obviously, if you're blotting them out, you're taking them out from the land of the living, so they're not going to be on the land anymore. The text wants us to know, this story really wants to highlight the relationship between man and the world at large, or the land that they occupy. Same with Genesis chapter 3. That's why mankind isn't directly cursed, but the land as a result. Mankind is defiling the land with their evil. And maybe we never consider this, but God is actually concerned for the land as well. And so he's removing people who are ruining the land, which is the earth, right? We see this idea with Israel. When God exiles Israel, he says he's giving the land its rest by removing them, so the land can have its rest that Israel never gave it. And so here's the application for us. We need to recognize that spiritual compromise on any level, always has broader consequences beyond just us as individuals. And I think that realization will impact the way that you relate to sin and deal with a process through your mistakes. Yes, there's grace and forgiveness and mercy and all that, but we should live with the understanding that, you know what, sin is like a hand grenade, and it's going to hurt someone in the process. It's going to impact the very land and the world around us on some level, if not immediately, over time. And so God also brings in the animals. This is not just about mankind. Other creatures are part of the issue in some way. The last verse is Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So it's this section of the story is supposed to end on a high note. But there's hope, just like Lamech said. So at the same time, we see God is sorrowful about man filling the earth with violence and using free will to stain his image. We also see God is looking for human partners to extend grace to and to, include them in what he's doing. So here's the last observation, is finding favor with God. It's as if God looks upon creation and he's like, everything's corrupted. The psalmist will kind of take this story and use that. God is looking for someone. He ain't finding nobody, to partner with. And the earth is corrupted with human violence. Creation doesn't find favor in his eyes, and there is one who does, though. And there's always, Noah represents the chosen remnant that God will always work with. It's not always complete annihilation, absolute destruction. Once again, the eyes of God, Noah finding favor in his eyes, it's referenced to communicate God sees everything as it really is. And his evaluation is correct. God is, if you notice in this section, he's looking a lot, he's seeing a lot, and God has found someone who's different. God sees Noah as very different from his generation. So Noah's a comfort, and God has provided, you might say, a comforter he can work with. Not to say Noah's in place of the Holy Spirit, but to say Noah in this story plays that comforting role. It's another Cain and Abel. And you're like, what? Yeah, there's another Cain and Abel distinction happening here. One has favor, Noah, and he's righteous in God's sight, while the other does not have God's favor. Instead of it just being Abel now, it's as though Noah and his family are Abel, and instead of just one Cain, you have Cain, but an entire generation of Cains. And so one righteous man is standing in opposition to an entire wicked generation, which sounds a lot like Jesus. And again, just like Abel found favor in God's sight and God looked favorably upon his offering, now we see Noah finding favor in God's sight, as though Noah is a new Abel. And all of humanity outside of Noah's family is like Cain. And again, it's just the Genesis 3 story has expanded to the rest of humanity. What happened in the garden has leaked out of the garden and is now filling the earth. Humans are born, right? Rebels see and desire and take and are violent, and God responds. But God also shows grace when judgment comes. This is the narrative pattern that will be used repeatedly throughout the rest of the Bible. So here's the last application for us. Live distinctly different from the corrupt culture you find yourself in. Not to completely say it's a wash and we throw the baby out with the bathwater, but trust that your faithfulness in God and towards God is going to, affect the world around you. My faithfulness to God is the result of having favor with God. So we don't need to find favor with the culture. I don't need to be popular. I don't need to be liked. I don't need people to applaud me and think I'm something. We already have God's acceptance and commendation because we're in Christ. Jesus is the true Noah, the better Noah, who has found favor and grace in the sight of the Father, and he extends that to us. So live from that place and seek to glorify him above all else, because we should be caring about God's opinion more than anything. And here's where we get to, how does this point to Jesus? Number one, this is all about grace in the midst of a very real, intensely evil generation. God is wiping things clean and cleansing the world of the effects of sin and the sources of sin on a material level, right? Just temporarily cleansing it. But we need Jesus to bring the once-for-all eternal cleansing of the heart. He brings cleansing on a spiritual level. We don't just need the land cleaned continually of evil occupants. We need our hearts to be cleaned. Because what happens in the land is caused by our hearts. We need that heart level cleansing Moses talked about and the prophets anticipated. And Jesus will be the ultimate righteous man in his generation, where just like the family identifies with Noah and is safe, we identify with Jesus. We're in him, the true ark and the true prophet and representative of humanity, and we're safe in the midst of a wicked generation. And Jesus will be the one who obeys the Father perfectly in the midst of the darkness and evil all around him, to the point that he allows that to overtake him and put him on a cross and kill him, just so he can rise again and be the salvation for humanity that we need. This is all pointing to Jesus on some level. So, in the next section, we're going to see the generations of Noah. We're going to see God has a really tough conversation with Noah about what's coming. He'll share his plan, give Noah clear instructions. Here's how to survive the flood with your family. And these instructions are very specific, and they carry deep significance, spiritual significance, that I can't wait to share with you. So that's what we'll get into in the next video. In the meantime, follow our reading plan. You can find that in the description of the video. Join our Thursday night conversations on our Discord server, our follow-up conversation. Leave an encouraging comment letting me know what stood out to you. And then like this video. It really does help. And I will see you guys hopefully in the next video teaching in Genesis chapter 6.